The Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria's Center for Financial Studies, in collaboration with Biodun Adedipe Associates Consult, as part of its objective to support a vibrant Nigerian economy, hosted the 10th edition of its National Economic Outlook at its corporate headquarters in Lagos. It brought stakeholders in the economy together and provided the opportunity to review 2023 and discuss the key developments shaping the economy in 2024. In his opening remarks, the President and Chairman of the Council, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, Dr. Ken Ubara, who joined virtually, said the event was an opportunity to critically examine the 2024 National Economic Outlook and implications for businesses.
Over the past 9 years, the economic outlook has grown to become a pivotal platform featuring distinguished economic actors and business analysts from the various sectors of the economy. Today, as we mark the 10th edition, we will critically examine the global and national economic landscape and its implications for business in 2024.
Delivering the keynote address on behalf of Mr. Mohammed Sani Abdullahi Atijo, Deputy Governor Economic Policy, Central Bank of Nigeria, the Director of Monetary Policy, Mr. Mohammed Tumala, Director of Monetary Policy Department, reiterated the commitment of the CIBN to a flexible exchange rates regime and the return to the conventional monetary policy approach with focus on price stability.
Falling inflation rates often lead to lowered policy rate. The central bank will then adjust its policy rate in response to inflation trends, and a decrease in inflationary pressures can prompt a more accommodative monetary policy. Lower interest rates mean that cost of borrowing for businesses also decreases, making capital more accessible. This is, in turn, can stimulate investment. Businesses can then fuel the growth and job creation in the country. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me also that for businesses that heavily rely on consumer spending, a decline in inflation can also be advantageous. As the purchasing power of consumers strengthens, they may be more inclined to spend, leading to increased demand for goods and services. This surge in aggregate demand can create opportunities for businesses to expand their customer base and boost sales. However, it is important to note that while a fall in inflation can bring about several positive outcomes, businesses must remain vigilant and adaptable. Economic conditions are dynamic, and external factors such as crude oil price, exchange rate, and global food supply chains can influence the trajectory of inflation. It is therefore crucial for businesses to stay informed, agile, and ready to adjust their strategies in response to changing economic landscapes. It is imperative to note that given the dynamics in global and domestic environment, the specific policies and priorities of the Central Bank of Nigeria may evolve based on emerging economic conditions. Therefore, as we traverse the complexities of both the domestic and global economy, the bank's strategies will play a pivotal role in maintaining stability and fostering an environment that encourages businesses, investments, job creation, and overall economic prosperity.
In his presentation on the state of the economy, Mr. Biodun Adedipe, an economist and chief consultant of BAA Consult, stressed that the execution of key policy reforms would be critical for Nigeria's economic recovery and stability.
Central bank alone, like the keynote speaker said, cannot bring down inflation. Even though inflation targeting is now the focus of central bank, the fiscal authorities need to complement. And that's the beauty of this year's budget. Now, if you have not analyzed it, I will just tell you something simple, and then I go to sit. Okay? budget of 2024 is by far better than budget of 2023. It's not just about the numbers, okay? But when you look at the structure and the content, first and foremost, allocation to capital spending at 9.99 trillion naira is significantly more than what we allocated in 2023. That's to start with. Then secondly, if you look, as our keynote speaker said, allocation to education and health also increased significantly compared to 2023 budget. But there's also an interesting thing there. The deficit in the budget is smaller in 2024 than in 2023. So what I want to bring out from that is the government, in terms of fiscal operations, is in the right direction. So as policy advocates, what we want to do is to encourage them to execute all these reforms they have announced. Because all the outlooks people are doing all over the world, there are some very funny and strange, projections for Nigeria. But everyone points to the reforms that we are doing in Nigeria, which means what is important for us is to execute the reforms.
At a robust panel session moderated by Mr. Olufemi Awoyemi, chairman of ProShare Limited, key regulators, seasoned economists, financial analysts, and business leaders provided their perspectives on what was critical for Nigeria's economy in 2024.
Why is NNPC, a private company, borrowing on behalf of the government? Second, why is the MOFI not the one leading warehousing government-owned enterprises, which include things like West African Gas Pipeline and LNG? And what most importantly is the role of the Securities and Exchange Commission as the apex regulator in defining the rules of engagement, which interconnects both the capital and the money market. Thank you, sir.
I think we should all understand that NNPC, even though it says limited, is still 100% government-owned entity. So in terms of the fundamentals of the company, it is still owned by the government. And it still transfers revenues to the government. And it's in the business of selling oil to the international market. So if it decides to get some of its suppliers to prepay, for future deliveries, it is actually in its right to do so. Now, as I said, I do not have the details, of the economics of the transaction, but this transaction is actually a transaction that is actually very, commonsensical, because these people are paying this money only because they know that they actually are going to lift, future deliveries, Now, in terms of MOFI, if you go back in history, MOFI used to exist. In the 1960s, 1970s, we had MOFI. And MOFI was the arm of government that was holding all of the government's investments in critical sectors of the economy, in banking, in manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, all the place. And then sometime, after we started the privatization, MOFI basically went into some kind of hibernation. Now MOFI is back. But MOFI will have to come back gradually. MOFI cannot be the kind of government investment arm that you see, for example, in some countries like in the Middle East. They have been doing this thing for the past 25 years or more. But MOFI is coming on very strong. And MOFI is choosing the sectors in which it is actually getting involved. So I think for now, I will say that in terms of the oil investments, NNPC has more expertise. So it is very commonsensical for NNPC to continue to represent the government in those investments, while MOFI, specializes in investments in which MOFI has a more competitive advantage.
I think MOFI is on the ball, and clearly the strategies that they would need to exploit will start with a holistic asset management plan. So again, begin to think precisely the way I would think as an asset manager with a portfolio of assets that I'm managing on behalf of my investors. So they have to have a very clear and well-articulated plan that clearly has identified all these non-financial assets, has some idea of their values, has some idea of their potential income generation if they were to be made to become income generating, has a very clear idea also about where they are and their current state. Now, having ascertained that, then you can come up with strategies for optimizing and possibly monetizing these assets. Moving from that is the point that my DG made very eloquently earlier, which is public-private partnerships. Government has to recognize that government is least positioned to optimize and maximize these non-financial assets. And they can only do it in partnership with private sector operators that would come with two things: expertise and capital, that will then aid in managing and developing and then managing these non-financial assets to enhance their efficiency and profitability. Efficiency is a word that I use very carefully here because, and this is not a Nigerian thing, globally, the public sector is not set up in a way for optimum efficiency.
I'm going to piggyback on what Dr. Adedipe said when he said that there is a change happening that we're not paying attention to. And like in all cycles, change occur. He said, and I quote, that we have Chinese, the Indians, and the Lebanese investing in manufacturing in Nigeria, whereas your sector and your participants are filled with complaints. Some of those complaints are focused around what we call the monetary dilemma, the FX illiquidity, the fiscal illiquidity, and the systemic illiquidity, which then posits a challenge that we cannot resolve most of this problem until we deal with productivity. And that has been your position, and it's well agreed. But against what Dr. Adedipe said, it has kind of like paralleled both of them and said, whereas one side is complaining, the other side is seeing opportunities. Can you help us address that and then help us contextualize how you posit that the manufacturing sector sees these engagements and the roles you expect and the outlook you see in 2024? Thank you.
One of the major issues that the government will need to address in terms of having a brighter outlook for 2024 is the issue of regulation. And because it is now very important for you to recognize the role that regulation plays in dampening manufacturing investment and even the survival of existing manufacturers. I'm sure many of you will be aware that just 2 days ago, or was it yesterday, Lagos State government imposed a ban on the use of styrofoams and single-use plastic because of the environmental issues. This is a form of regulation that, yes, on good purpose, but do you just wake up one day and announce a ban? Because there are so many stakeholders that you needed to consult. You have the producer, you have the wholesale person, you have the retailer, you have the those involved in logistics, and more importantly, you have the end users. So you needed to be able to encourage them to transit to something else. I mean, because these are economic actors, and they influence some pattern of behavior. As a government, you are responsible for what happens to their business and what happens to the well-being of the people in terms of the value that is delivered by their business. So this is a typical example of how regulation should be done in such a way that it's a win-win for government, for the people, and for the investor, be it manufacturing, be it in wholesale, and be it in logistics.
Where does Nigeria have competitive advantages right now? And where are those competitive advantages captured in both the budget and the National Development Plan?
Comparative competitiveness, because comparative advantage is not it anymore. We have comparative competitiveness in many areas. Services is one. And again, let's leave all. Let's go to our primary cash crops, okay? The likes of cocoa, cashew, sesame, cotton. But what we have failed to do is to do what we call end-to-end. We take a part of it. The entire value chain is not captured. And speaking to that, in the budget for this year, I've seen a few things that align. But you see, what I've seen in the budget are what I will refer to as silo mentality packages. So you need to have a nexus between Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security, Ministry of Trade, okay, Finance, Water Resources. So there should be synergy amongst those four contending ministries.
Is there a way you can help us harness Dr. Adedipe's presentations around the interest rates, my concerns as I've expressed based on what I've looked at, and the last most important one, the concept of the black hole. I mentioned the black hole because the data, I spent years around data, the data we work on does not fully reflect the entire economy. And as such, you find ourselves with black holes in there. So when you expect certain things to happen that way, it doesn't because of what you call those black holes manifesting. So, Mr. Chukwu, can you help us bring it together?
In our own models of how the economy should perform, there are critical data that sometimes we miss. And if we miss out some of those critical data, which is referred to as black hole, then it becomes possible to make an assumption that will mirror the reality. You know what they call fallacy? Fallacy is a sound judgment or deduction based on a false premise. So if the premise is wrong, whatever you build on it will also be wrong. And unfortunately, we saw a Nigerian Bureau of Statistics that was up and doing at some point. But I'm not sure whether we can still say exactly the same thing today with the figures we have on unemployment. Like I have said, you really can't give me a figure for decision making that has no relevance to reality. If Nigeria's unemployment rate is 41%, then we could be as strong as Germany or any of the Western countries, or even the US. So clearly, if you tell me you're using modern parameters and they don't talk to my reality, you are not really solving my problem. So I hope that the agencies, because when you talk of macroeconomic data, it's difficult for you and I to start comparing it. We need to rely on some central body that is funded for that purpose. And then we build on our individual corporate data based on what we think the macroeconomic environment will present. But as long as we have those gaps, sometimes our judgments may not come true, not because we're not logical in our thinking. Thank you.
A major takeaway from the 10th edition of the CIBN National Economic Outlook is the need for the alignment of fiscal and monetary policies to grow Nigeria's economy strongly, faster, and more sustainably in an inclusive manner.